Well, good morning. Happy New Year. Welcome to EastLake Church. My name is Kevin McPeak. I'm one of the pastors here. I'm delighted that you are here as we kick off not just a new year, but this new series called God for Us. A new year often causes us to do things like look at ourselves and figure out, like, do we need to make a New Year's resolution, right? Why is it that we make resolutions? Because there's something about our life that we need to change, right? Maybe you feel like you need to eat better, or you got to exercise more. Maybe you're actually here today because your New Year's resolution was to come to church more, which is great. I'm actually not going to do the thing where I ask you to raise your hand if you made a New Year's resolution, because let's be honest, it's January 7th. Some of you made a resolution and haven't started it yet, or some of you have already quit. I don't want you to feel called out in either case. But keeping these resolutions is really hard because it requires us to change. Change is difficult. And what I've found in my own life is that when I have to deal with a change that's hard, sometimes my initial response is to run away, right? I try to flee from the issue or the problem that I have by running away by, I don't know, a change of scenery or a change of relationship status or a change of how I'm trying to cope with the problem. And today what we're going to do is we're going to look at the story of someone in the Bible who decided to run when he was facing some problems. And what we're going to do is we're going to see that in the middle of those struggles and the middle of the pain of all that change, and honestly the pain that this person caused for himself, God was at work to change him for the better. In fact, that's what we're going to discover throughout this entire series. That basically God is for his people in the middle of their challenges. And because of that, we can be confident that God is for us as well. Now, the story we're going to look at today, it deals with a guy who created a whole lot of problems for himself through his bad decisions. And then the way he dealt with them was by running away. I love a good story about somebody on the run, whether that's The Fugitive, The Bourne Identity. The other day, my wife and I watched The Family Plan. I don't know if any of you have seen that. It's a new movie with Mark Wahlberg. He's a former assassin, now trying to live like a normal family life in Buffalo, New York. I'm from upstate New York. There's no reason to live there. And here's the thing that I think the most important observation I have from the movie. Mark Wahlberg and I, believe it or not, are right around the same age, and his hair is suspiciously dark in this movie. Suspiciously. And I know some of you are saying oh, you're only making fun of Mark Wahlberg because he's richer and smarter and in better shape and more talented than you are. And you know what I would say to that? Yes, that's fair. But the whole story is he's on the run. And we always have these stories about a man on the run. And in the man on the run story we're going to look at today, the main character is a guy named Jacob. If you want to look up his story, it starts in chapter 25 of Genesis. And in order to understand Jacob, you actually have to know the backstory of his family a little bit. So Jacob is the second son of his parents, Isaac and Rebekah. If you're new to the church, if you're new to the Bible, don't worry. Let me just say quickly. So Jacob is the son of Isaac. Isaac is the son of Abraham. Abraham is a central figure in the Bible, really critical character, because God has promised Abraham that he will bless him and his descendants. And it's actually through this lineage of Abraham that we get the entire narrative of the people of Israel. So Abraham's a key character. So Abraham is the grandparent of Jacob, the guy we're going to look at today. So when Jacob was born, he was the younger of twin boys. So fraternal twins. His older brother by moments is his twin brother Esau. Now, what's interesting is Scripture says that when they were in their mother's womb, they were wrestling with each other, which I've obviously never been pregnant, sounds unpleasant, right? But these two were wrestling with each other, and when they were born, Esau came out first, so he was given all of the birthrights of the firstborn son. In that day, in that age, in that culture, what that meant was at a minimum, he would have twice the inheritance of any of the other siblings. So being the firstborn is a big deal. There are rights that come with that. And Jacob, at his birth, is described, if you look in Scripture, it actually describes him as, while being born, grasping at the heel of his brother Esau, who had been born first, which is a wild thing to say about a baby, right? That's like baby jujitsu going on. He's grasping at the heel. But it actually leads to, if you look at the original Hebrew, that phrase, grasping at the heel, it means deceptive. It means it's someone who tries to deceive, someone who's trying to grasp at someone else. And so Jacob's name actually means deceiver, which is, I would say, a tough name to have as a baby. So years later, that actually plays out in his character. We're going to zoom some years ahead forward, and what happens is Jacob actually tricks his father into giving him the firstborn blessing instead of his brother Esau. He fools his father, he deceives his father, and receives the blessing that was supposed to go by right to his older brother. And what happens is that when Esau finds out about this, he vows not just to get even, but to kill his brother Jacob. That's what's going to happen. The mother, her name is Rebecca, finds out about this plan, and she goes, Jacob, you got to get out of here. You need to leave because your brother's literally going to kill you. This wasn't one of those figures of speech, right? Like, if you use my Xbox again, I'm going to kill you. Like, no, this is like literally going to kill him. So the mother, Rebecca, says, hey, you got to get out of here. And he goes on a journey to stay with his mother's brother, whose name is Laban. So that's basically his uncle. Okay, I know, all of this sounds like the Real Housewives of the Old Testament. I recognize. There's like all of this dysfunction and double-crossing. It's wild stuff that's going on. And in the middle of this mess that Jacob has created for himself because of his deception, here's the thing. A little bit of a spoiler alert. God is still going to bless Jacob, but he's going to make him walk through some things first. And Jacob's going to be changed because of that process. And here's what I found about change in my own life. Most of the meaningful change that I've experienced has come as a result of brokenness. Broken relationships, broken dreams, broken promises. Times I've broken my word. Just the brokenness of the world. We could go on all day with all the ways that things can be broken. And what I've found in my own life is that God does his best work in my life in the middle of brokenness. I got a great definition of brokenness from, some of you may know the author and pastor, Dr. Tony Evans. And he said that brokenness is when you're stripped of your self-sufficiency. I think that's such a great way to look at what broken is. You're stripped of your self-sufficiency. You're basically stripped of this idea that you can do things for yourself. And once we realize that we don't have enough power on our own, we can recognize our dependence on God. And that's the kind of change that God is seeking to make in our lives. It's also the kind of change that God was seeking to make in Jacob's life. So let's jump back into Jacob's story. Okay, so just to recap a little bit. He deceived his father in such a way that he obtained a blessing that rightfully belonged to his older brother, and now he has to run away and hide. He has to leave his family, he has to leave his community, he has to leave the land of his father, and he has to strike out by himself on his own. So what happens next is this incredible demonstration about how God begins to move in Jacob's life and how we can learn from that. And the first lesson we can draw from this story is that when we're struggling in the middle of our own brokenness, in the middle of our own flaws, it's critical to do this. Let God reveal a bigger story to you. If you're following along in the app, by the way, New Year, I would encourage you, download and use the EastLake Church app. It's got the outline in there, and that's a great way to just kind of follow along with what's going on. That's the first fill-in. Let God reveal a bigger story to you. Here's how that works in Jacob's story. After he's deceived his father and obtained this blessing that he had no business getting, he runs away. And while he's on the run, he stops to sleep for the night, and God appears to him in a dream. And this is what God says: I am the eternal one, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you are now lying is the land I have promised to give to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as many as there are specks of dust on the earth. You will spread out to the west, east, north, and south. Through your descendants, all the families of the earth will find true blessing. Know I am with you, and I will watch over you no matter where you go. One day I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done all I have promised you. So early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had put under his head, he set it up as a pillar, and then poured oil on top of it to commemorate his experience with God. He named that place Bethel, which means house of God. Now, I want to explain a little bit about what's happening here, because there's an interesting phrase. It says that Abraham is Jacob's father. It doesn't mean that in the way that we mean that in modern Western culture. In that time and in that era, saying that Abraham is your father simply means that you are a descendant of Abraham. It doesn't mean that he is your literal father. And that's really significant because God has promised Abraham, hey, I'm going to bless all of your descendants. And so he's saying, you are one of the descendants I promised to bless. And so even though Jacob has broken this relationship with his brother, he's deceived his father, he's alone and on the run, you know what God is saying? The promise still stands. Nothing has changed on that front. You are going to have descendants. You are going to come back here someday. You're not alone in the middle of this. There's a bigger story at work here, and it's not over, even if you feel like you've messed everything up right now. And this is true in your life and in my life as well. When we mess things up, when everything falls apart, when we feel lost, God is saying, you're not alone. There's a bigger story at work here. It isn't over, even if you feel like it is. Some of you may have noticed from time to time, you might see somebody who has a semicolon tattoo. If you're not familiar with where that comes from, actually started with an organization called Project Semicolon, and they deal with suicide prevention and mental health awareness. And the reason they use a semicolon as a symbol is because a semicolon indicates that the sentence isn't over. There's more yet to be written. And even though there's a pause there, we're not putting a period. We're saying the story's not over. There's more yet to be written in someone's story and in someone's life. And just like Jacob's story wasn't over, no matter what you're going through, your story's not over. I don't have a semicolon tattoo. I don't have any tattoos. But when I run in races, some of you know I like distance running, and I wear a shirt. That's the shirt. I have it right here. I was having a bad day. But I actually wear this shirt when I run, and it has a semicolon on the shoulder. And the reason it does is because I've gone through that season where I thought my story was over, where I was dealing with some serious issues of depression, and I thought, it's over for me. There's no reason to continue. And the reason I wear that semicolon is to remind myself, hey, there was more story yet to be written. And there might be somebody else who will see that semicolon and go, maybe that guy walked through the same thing I did. And maybe they'll see me bent over, exhausted at the finish line like I was, and go, well, he made it to the finish line. The semicolon is a powerful symbol. The story is not yet over. There's another lesson we can learn from Jacob's story, and that's this. Let God teach you to reach you. When we last left Jacob, he was alone. He was trying to find his way to his uncle. Remember that? He was going to his uncle, and he finally does find his uncle. His uncle's name is Laban. So depending on how you would view this, it's his uncle Laban or his tío Laban. And he falls in love with Laban's younger daughter, Rachel. And he's promised, hey, you can marry Rachel if you work for your uncle for 7 years. Now, quick aside, never mind that Jacob and Rachel are first cousins, okay? Different culture, different time, different rules. If it helps you to make sense of this, just imagine the stories in East County. It makes a lot more sense. Anyway, so is that too far? Is that too far? Okay, I might not do that one at the 11. I wasn't sure. But here's the problem, you laughed. That's not good. I'm joking, okay? I'm sorry. Like I said, I am a flawed person. God is working to change me. We'll see if he changes that one by the 11. Anyway, so here's the deal. So he's gonna marry Rachel, the beautiful second son of his uncle Laban. And on his wedding night, Uncle Laban pulls the old switcheroo, and instead of winding up with Rachel, the second daughter, he winds up with Leah, the firstborn daughter, which he has no interest in. And he doesn't discover this until the morning after the wedding, where they have already consummated their marriage. By the way, if you don't know what consummated marriage means, go to 5 and 5 after service. You can ask Pastor Freddie. He'll explain it to you. Freddie, tag, you're it. But here's how that moment is described in Genesis 29, because this is really important. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, his uncle, "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you," note this word, "deceived me?" Are you noticing what Jacob is accusing his uncle of? It's pretty rich if you think about it. He's saying, "You deceived me. That's not fair." Jacob's whole life story has rested on him deceiving other people. His name is deceiver. And now he's deeply offended because his uncle has deceived him. And do you know what his uncle says by way of explanation? Because this isn't a small thing. His uncle says, well, Leah is the firstborn, so she's supposed to get married first. We don't give to the secondborn, Rachel, what's supposed to go to the firstborn, Leah. Well, remember how Jacob used deception so that he, the secondborn, could get what didn't belong to him from his brother, the firstborn? Now he's on the other end of deception being used to make sure that the firstborn actually gets what's coming to the firstborn, right? He actually has to commit to working for his uncle for another 7 years in order to marry Rachel. So yes, at the end of this, he does wind up with 2 wives. Like I said, different culture, different time, different rules. This is a situation where the Bible is descriptive of what is happening rather than prescriptive of how we ought to live our lives, just to clarify in case there's any misunderstanding about that. So we look at Jacob, the deceiver, getting deceived, and it's like, well, how the turntables have turned. So he's upset because he's the victim of the same thing he has done to others. With Jacob, every accusation is a confession. He's mad because his uncle did to him exactly the same thing that he did to his father and he did to his brother. And isn't that human nature? Boy, the thing that so often offends so many of us is the flaw that's actually at the center of us, right? We get deeply offended by the person who gossips about us when we ourselves kind of have a problem with gossip. Or we demand honesty from other people when we kind of have a flexible relationship with the truth ourselves. Or we criticize somebody for being selfish, and then we look at ourselves and like maybe we're not quite so generous in our own life. It is so easy because of human nature, because of sin, for us to become the thing that we despise. And that's where Jacob is at in the story. He's offended because he's been deceived and deprived of what was rightfully his, which is exactly how his brother must have felt. And now, so he's in this increasingly tense situation with his uncle. And so they make a deal. Okay, you can continue working for me if I give you some livestock. So Jacob is going to be paid in livestock. And basically, I'll skip all the details, but Laban tries to trick and cheat Jacob out of some of the livestock, and then Jacob basically double crosses him and winds up with more livestock. And basically, there's all of this tension between Uncle Laban and Jacob, and also Uncle Laban's sons, Jacob's brothers-in-law, and it's getting to a breaking point. And so God appears to Jacob in a dream and says this: "I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land." God is saying, again, you're not alone. I've seen everything that's been happening. I've seen how you've been deceived, and I'm the same God that was with you when you were on the run before. When you were all by yourself, I was with you. I didn't desert you then, and I'm not going to desert you now. Now, there's a bunch of stuff that continues to happen in the story. It's a really broad, sweeping story, so I'm summarizing a lot of stuff pretty quickly. But what happens next is basically Jacob leaves with Rachel, Leah, and all of their children without saying goodbye to Uncle Laban. Uncle Laban is deeply offended by this. He catches up with them, and the two men basically have this debate where they're accusing each other of betrayal, and they finally come up with an agreement. They realize they can't live together. They've got to live apart. So they come to an agreement to make a boundary between them so they can live apart from one another in peace. Some of you are going, well, what would that be like? I can explain it in a way that you're totally familiar with. So, any of you ever heard of a backseat Wally? If you know what a backseat Wally is, it's a padded divider you can put between your children when they're driving so they don't punch each other? I've lost some of you for the rest of the sermon because half of you right now, the parents of young ones, are on your phones Googling backseat Wally. You're hoping they can deliver it to the church before you drive home today. Listen, I've lived it. I get it. We could sell those things on the patio and make a killing. But it's the same idea. Like, this is where the Bible cracks me up sometimes because it's so real that they have to make a boundary. They have to divide a line between them because just like kids in the backseat of a car, they're gonna keep hitting each other. So Jacob and Laban basically agree, hey, we're gonna separate. We're gonna live a different path from each other. And so they go their separate ways. And Jacob now is heading home, back to the place of his birth. But he's a little nervous. Now, why would he be nervous? Well, let's not forget why he left in the first place. He had tricked his brother, Esau, out of his birthright. And his brother is still at home. And Jacob's pretty nervous about this. So he sends messengers ahead to go like, hey, Jacob's on the way, and he is so sorry, and he just wants to pay so much respect to you. And what happens is the messengers go, and they visit with Esau, and they come back. And Jacob's like, well, what did he say? And the messengers are like, you know Esau, right? He's not waiting there. He's decided to meet you. He's coming this way with 400 men. Not good. If you're Jacob, that's a bad situation, right? Like, imagine, put yourself in Jacob's shoes. Imagine you have done something horrible, okay? You stole something from someone's house. You know you stole it. They know you stole it. And it was really valuable. And now you have to go to their house, right? You got to go to their house. And on your way over, you find out that they're not going to wait for you there. They're actually going to come and meet you on the way with 400 of their friends. What do you think is going to happen? Not good things, right? So Jacob sends everything ahead. He's like, send the camels and the goats and the donkeys and the cows. Send my Xbox. Send my LaDainian Tomlinson autographed Chargers jersey. Give him everything I have because I basically want to buy him off. I want to get him to forgive me just by giving him stuff. And then he sends his family ahead, not all the way to Esau, but just ahead a little bit. So now Jacob is by himself. And there's this wild turn in the story. Here's what happens. This left Jacob all alone in the camp, and a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of his socket. Then the man said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. What is your name? The man asked. He replied, Jacob. Your name will no longer be Jacob, the man told him. From now on, you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won. Now, this part of the story it's kind of confusing, right? Because you get so focused on, well, he's got to go and deal with this conflict with Esau. That's the important thing. He and everything he owns and his family, they're going to meet with Esau, and then all of a sudden, not with Esau, wrestling match. That's a really strange turn. He battles somebody overnight, and then the person he's battling sees like, well, I'm not going to defeat Jacob. So this person wrenches his hip out of socket and then says, let me go. And Jacob won't let him go until he blesses him. That seems like just this, honestly kind of strange interlude in the story. And as I read it, one of the things I look at is I go, well, who is he wrestling? Right? Is it like some guy that was hiding behind rocks who came out and attacked him, or is it someone else? Is it an angel? Well, actually, that's what the book of Hosea, a book of prophecy later on in the Bible, that's what the book of Hosea says, that Jacob was actually wrestling an angel. Or was he wrestling God himself? Jacob seems to suggest that when he later on says that he has seen the face of God and lived. So certainly, something in the middle of this, a lot of Bible scholars believe that he was actually wrestling God. Either way, it's clear that he wasn't just wrestling some random guy. God was in the middle of this battle working to change Jacob. And then there's this really interesting thing where the man he's wrestling with sees, okay, I'm not going to defeat Jacob, so he wrenches his hip out of socket, which is a very painful thing. What are we supposed to make it like? How does that make sense? How does that fit in the story? Well, here's what I believe it tells us. I think it tells us at least two things. The first thing it tells us is this. If we want to battle against what God is trying to do in our lives, he's going to let us fight with him. God is not going to force himself on you. He's not going to force himself on me. He's not going to force himself on the people we love. When we want to fight against what God is trying to do in our lives, he's going to allow us to have that fight. It's called free will. He makes room for it. But then there's the second point, which is, okay, if we do decide to fight with God, if we do decide to struggle with him that way, there's going to be some pain. There's going to be some hurt. You might walk with a limp because of that struggle. And boy, I'll tell you what, there's nothing like pain to get our attention. Very few of us seek after pain, but it sure is effective in getting us to change. And so at the end of this struggle, Jacob's wrestling, and he clings to his opponent, and he says, I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. And you're thinking, okay, what kind of a blessing would it be? Would it be like riches? Would it be power? Would it be long life? Well, the blessing is a new name. That doesn't seem like this enormous blessing. He says, your name isn't Jacob anymore. Your name is Israel. Well, why is that a blessing? Why does that matter? Well, it means that his name is no longer heel grabber, striver, deceiver. He's not that anymore. He's saying, you have a new name now, he who struggles with God. And God is saying, your past doesn't define you. Your sins, your flaws, your mistakes, that's not what defines you. That's not what you are. There's only one thing that defines who you are, and that's your relationship with me. And the question that I look at in all of this, because I kind of nerd out on this stuff, is why a wrestling match? Like, of all the things that God could have used, why is a wrestling match where he says, you're no longer a deceiver, I'm giving you a new name? Well, just a quick thing about the Bible. There are no details in the Bible that are by accident. They're always there for a reason. They're trying to have us notice something. And here's what I'd suggest to you. The reason it's a wrestling match is because that's exactly how Jacob's story started. If you remember, all the way back in the womb, he was wrestling with his brother. That's where all of the strife and deception began. And so God is saying, I'm going to jump in the middle of the place you struggle most. I'm going to be present in the middle of your hardest battle. I'm going to be in the mess of that. And I'm going to redeem it, I'm going to fix it, and I'm going to make it so that your name is no longer grasping at the heel, no longer deceiver. At the end of this, you have a new identity that's entirely defined by your relationship to me. See, when God shows up in the flesh in the middle of our struggles, it changes everything. It redefines our identity. God showing up in the flesh in the middle of our struggles is exactly what we celebrated 2 weeks ago on Christmas. That's the story of Christmas. God arrives in the flesh to struggle through the pain of being human alongside us and to die this sacrificial death on the cross through which we can be redeemed and made whole. And some of you are in the middle of your own wrestling match today as the year starts. And I don't mean like Lucha Libre or WWE, right? I'm talking about like a real struggle in your life. And some of you are wondering if you're going to make it through or what life is even going to be like on the other side of this struggle. You've been struggling for a long time, and maybe you feel like you're defined by your past or you're defined by the struggle. Just like you feel like Jacob's name, deceiver, was tied to his past, that your identity is tied to your past and your struggle and your pain and where you failed. Maybe you feel like your name is failure, liar, cheat, addict, abuser, manipulator, hypocrite. Maybe you feel like your past is just defined by anger or foolishness or recklessness, selfishness, bad decisions, missed opportunities, broken trust. Maybe you feel like what you're walking through is your identity. Depression, anxiety, divorce, isolation. And you feel like just that's who I feel like I am. None of those are your name. God has a bigger and a better story that he's writing in your life. And so, let God rename you. God gave Jacob a new name because Jacob had been changed by God. He was a new creation, so God gave him a new name. And as has been said so brilliantly by our good friend, Pastor Hosanna Wong, you have a new name too. Your name isn't failure, it's chosen. Your name isn't liar, it's loved. Your name isn't cheater or addict or thief. It's redeemed, it's accepted, it's seen, it's strong, it's loved. Those are your names. And Jacob got that new name not when he was standing on his own being self-sufficient. When did he get that new name? When he was in pain and clinging in the middle of that and saying, I'm not going to let go until you bless me. If you're walking through a struggle right now, you're walking through some pain, cling to Jesus. Don't let go until he blesses you. This is the way that God shows us that he is for us. I don't know what you're walking through this year. Maybe you're in a good spot, but there's a truth I know about life. You either just walked through a difficult season, you're in the middle of one right now, or there's one headed your way. It's just kind of how life works. And when you're in that season, know this, God is writing a bigger story than you can imagine. And even when you feel like it's stopped, it's not stopped. It's a semicolon. Keep going. God's still writing a greater story. And as he works out that story, he's going to call you by a new name that's not dictated by what you've done, but it's dictated by who you are in him. Would you stand with me? In a moment, we're going to share one more worship song, and it's honestly, it's one of my favorites that we do around here. It's God with us. And the chorus says, God with us, God for us. Nothing can stand against. No one can come between us. And it's that same idea of just clinging to God in the middle of the brokenness, in the middle of the struggle, in the middle of the pain. That's what I'd encourage you to do. And so if you're in the middle of that kind of struggle, let this song be your prayer. Let this song be a declaration. God with you, God for you, because he is with you and for you. Would you pray with me? Jesus, I thank you that in the middle of the struggles that we have, you are present. You never leave us, you never forsake us. You're the same God of the promise, and the same promise is still true. And so whatever we're walking through today, Jesus, I pray that we would cling to you, that we would embrace the identity that you have for us, not that's defined by our past, but that's defined by you. Jesus, we love you, and it's in your mighty name we pray. Amen.